Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It is Monday, January 26th, 2026. And today we are doing something a little different. Usually we look at a topic and we dissect it from top to bottom. But today we are telling a story.
It's a ghost story, really.
It is. It's a story that spans 43 years, bridging the gap between a screaming siren in a Soviet bunker in 1983 and the silent, terrifying hum of a centrifuge spinning in the dark right now.
It connects the past to the very, very immediate present.
Exactly. And it's all about this concept of the thin red line, that very narrow, very fragile boundary that separates the world as we know it. Our coffee runs, our emails, this conversation from dust.
From the end of history. It's not an exaggeration.
No, it's not. We usually think of the apocalypse as this loud, cinematic event, right? Asteroids, alien invasions, or the sudden launch of 1,000 missiles like in the movies.
The Hollywood version.
The Hollywood version. But what we're going to unpack today is this idea that the end of the world comes in two flavors. There's the apocalypse that almost was, which was loud and panicked. And then there's the apocalypse that is quietly building.
Which is the one happening right now. It's less like a car crash and more like a diagnosis, a slow creeping dread.
That's a great way to put it. It's technical, it's bureaucratic, and it is almost entirely silent.
And often, the silent one is the one you really need to worry about.
Mm-hmm.
Because by the time you hear the noise, the game is already over.
So to get our heads around this, we are looking at a really unique stack of sources today. We have 3 documents that couldn't be more different, yet they tell one continuous, terrifying narrative.
Right. First, we have the historical account of Stanislav Petrov. If you don't know the name, you absolutely need to. He's the man who was sitting in the chair in 1983 when the computers effectively said, "Game over."
The man who stared into the abyss. Then, to understand the stakes of that moment, to really feel the weight of what he was staring at, we are pulling from a highly technical and frankly bone-chilling manual from 1977. It's titled The Effects of Nuclear Weapons.
A classic. It's a government document from the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy.
And it doesn't use poetic language, it doesn't talk about morality. It just tells you with cold scientific precision exactly what happens to a human body, to a city, when the button is pushed.
It's the physics of Armageddon.
It really is. And finally, to bring us to the present day, literally to where we are sitting in early 2026, we have a report from the Institute for Science and International Security, or ISIS. This report analyzes data from mid-2025 regarding Iran's nuclear capabilities.
And if the 1977 manual is the what, this report is the how and the when.
And the when is basically now. So our mission today is to understand the mechanics of nuclear brinkmanship. We're going to look at how a single human decision saved us in the past, the physics of the disaster he prevented, and the data that suggests we are currently living through a rapid, unmonitored nuclear breakout that almost no one is talking about.
It's a heavy topic, but it's one we just can't afford to ignore.
So let's start with the apocalypse that almost was. Take us back. It's September 26, 1983.
The context here is it's vital. If you think geopolitical tensions are high now, 1983 was a powder keg waiting for a spark.
Right.
The Cold War was at its absolute peak.
Yeah.
You have to remember, just a few weeks prior to this night, the Soviet military had shot down a civilian airliner, Korean Airlines Flight 007.
That was the flight where they killed everyone on board, right? I remember reading there was a sitting U.S. congressman on that plane.
Correct. Larry McDonald from Georgia. The world is outraged. The Soviets were defensive, they were paranoid, they doubled down, they thought it was a spy plane.
And on the other side, you have Ronald Reagan calling the Soviet Union the evil empire. The rhetoric is, it's biblical, it's good versus evil.
Exactly. So paranoia is off the charts. The Soviets, particularly their leader, Yuri Andropov, are genuinely convinced the Americans are planning a surprise first strike under the cover of a military exercise called Able Archer. Everyone is sleeping with one eye open.
So into this atmosphere steps Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov. Who was this guy?
He's an officer in the Soviet Air Defense Forces. On this particular night, he is the duty officer at a secret bunker called Serpukhov 15, just outside Moscow. This is the command center for the Oko system.
Oko means eye, right, in Russian.
Exactly. It was their new state-of-the-art nuclear early warning system. It was their crown jewel, and this is important technically. It wasn't just relying on old-school ground radar. It used a constellation of satellites in highly elliptical orbits. They're called Molniya orbits.
Can you explain that orbit for us? Why does that specific orbit matter so much?
Sure, a Molniya orbit is, well, it's clever. It's designed so that the satellite spends a very long time hanging over the high northern latitudes. So from its perspective, it has this long, uninterrupted view of the American Midwest.
Right over the missile fields in places like North Dakota and Montana?
Precisely. They were looking for the thermal bloom, the intense heat signature of a Minuteman or MX missile launching out of its silo. The idea was to get the earliest possible warning.
So Petrov is sitting there monitoring the screens, and let's be very clear about his job. A lot of people have this image of the red button on his desk.
Yeah, let's clear that up right away. That's a myth. He didn't have a launch button. He couldn't start World War III on his own. His job was arguably harder.
Harder how?
He was the filter. He was the human validator. If the brand new billion-ruble computer system said attack, his job was to use his training and judgment to verify there was a real legitimate threat, and then report it up the chain of command to the Soviet General Staff, and then to Andropov himself.
And here is the kicker, right? The Soviet doctrine at the time and the mindset of the leadership was launch on warning.
That's the terrifying part. It means if they get the call from Petrov that missiles are incoming, they don't wait for them to hit Soviet soil.
No time.
No time. They have maybe 15 to 20 minutes from his call until impact. They launch their own thousands of missiles immediately to ensure they aren't wiped out on the ground before they can retaliate. Yep. The logic is brutal. Use it or lose it.
So the window for decision-making for the top brass, for Andropov, would have been what, a couple of minutes at most?
That's right. Petrov's report would have been the trigger. If he picks up that phone and says, it's real, the leadership, as paranoid as they were in late '83, would almost certainly have authorized a full-scale retaliation. No question.
Okay, so he's sitting now, the shift is probably quiet, and then the siren goes off.
Out of nowhere, a deafening siren. The system lights up, a big, red, backlit lawn C indicator on the main wall. The computer is screaming that a single intercontinental ballistic missile has been launched from the United States, heading toward the Soviet Union.
Just one.
At first, just one. And the room just erupts into chaos. You've got 200 people in this bunker, military operators, technicians, all looking at him. People are shouting, alarms are blaring. The protocol is crystal clear. But Petrov freezes. He looks at the data, and then a moment later, the system updates.
Another one.
Second missile, then a third missile, a fourth, a fifth, all from the same base.
5 nuclear missiles inbound, confirmed by the computer.
That's what the machine said. The machine, which was supposed to be infallible. Now, you have to put yourself in his shoes. You have civilians, officers, everyone looking at you. The protocol is clear. You pick up the direct line to the Kremlin and you say, we are under attack.
But he doesn't do that.
He doesn't. He picks up the phone to the duty officer at Army headquarters and reports a system malfunction, a false alarm.
That is an insane gamble. I mean, if he's wrong, he's not just costing his country a few minutes. He is single-handedly letting his country be destroyed without a fight. He's committing treason in a way.
Absolutely. If those missiles were real, his name would go down in history as the greatest traitor the Soviet Union had ever known.
So why? Why did he do it? What was the logic in that moment of pure chaos?
It was a fascinating mix of logic, intuition, and a deep distrust of technology. First, the pure logic. Petrov reasoned that if the Americans were going to start World War III, they wouldn't do it with just 5 missiles.
Right. It's all or nothing. You don't poke the bear, you try to kill it in one shot.
Exactly. A first strike is meant to be a decapitation strike. You send everything you have, hundreds, thousands of missiles, to destroy their command and control, their leadership, and their ability to shoot back. 5 missiles. As he said later, it was just an illogical start to the end of the world. It didn't make military sense.
But the computer was sure. The data was there.
The computer was sure. But Petrov knew the computer was new. He was an engineer, part of the team that had implemented this very system. He knew it had bugs. He knew it had been rushed into service. He didn't trust it.
He knew its flaws.
He knew its flaws. He also had another piece of information, or rather a lack of information. He was checking the ground-based radar systems, the older tech that looks over the horizon. And they were seeing nothing.
Now, there is a delay there, right? Because of the curvature of the Earth, the radar can't see the missiles right at launch.
Correct. The satellites see the heat of the launch instantly. The radar has to wait for the missiles to physically rise above the horizon line. So there's a few minutes of lag. But even as the minutes ticked by, the radar screens stayed stubbornly, beautifully blank. That was a crucial piece of negative data for him.
And there was something about his background, too, wasn't there? He wasn't just a soldier.
Correct, and this might be the most important factor. Petrov had civilian training. He was an engineer by trade before joining the military. Most of his colleagues were pure military men, drilled from day one to follow orders, follow the protocol, don't ask questions,
Trust the system.
trust the system. Petrov later said that if anyone else from the military had been the duty officer that night, they almost certainly would have reported the attack. It was his civilian, analytical mindset that allowed him to pause, to question the machine, to think outside the checklist.
He admitted later he wasn't sure, though. It wasn't a moment of absolute clarity.
No, not at all. He said he was never even 50-50. He said his legs felt like they were turning to jelly. He just had a funny feeling in his gut. He was sweating, he was panicked, but his instinct told him the computer was lying.
A funny feeling. That's what stood between us and a full-blown nuclear winter.
It turned out he was right. No missiles arrived. The minutes passed. The radar screens remained empty. The world kept turning.
So what was it? What tricked the all-seeing eye?
It was a freak alignment of geometry and weather. It was almost poetic in its mundanity. The Oko satellites were looking at the U.S. missile fields at a very specific angle, at a specific time of day. It was high noon over there. And the sunlight was reflecting off the tops of very high-altitude clouds above North Dakota.
Sunlight on clouds. Not a hacker, not a spy, not a military error, just the weather.
Sunlight on clouds. The satellite's relatively simple sensors mistook that intense, concentrated reflection for the thermal bloom of a missile engine. And because of the specific geometry of the satellite's Molniya orbit in relation to the Earth and the Sun, that reflection stayed in the sensor's view for a few moments, mimicking the trajectory of a missile rising from a silo. It was a 1 in a billion cosmic coincidence.
But that is just, it's terrifyingly mundane. So Petrov saves the world. He must have been given a medal, a parade, made a hero of the Soviet Union.
You would think, but it was quite the opposite. He was officially reprimanded.
You're kidding. For what?
For improper paperwork. He hadn't filled out the war diary correctly during the incident.
Because he was a little busy trying not to start World War III.
Exactly. But you have to understand the Soviet system. He embarrassed his superiors. He embarrassed the scientists who built the perfect system. They couldn't reward him because to reward him would be to admit that the entire system, and by extension they had failed, catastrophically.
The system had to protect itself.
It always does. So they pulled him up on a technicality. He was sidelined, reassigned to a less sensitive post, and the stress of the event and the subsequent investigation just broke him. He suffered a nervous breakdown and eventually took early retirement.
And the story stayed secret for years.
For over a decade, he lived in obscurity. His wife died of cancer in 1997. He lived in a small, rundown apartment in a town near Moscow, largely forgotten, until a general's memoir came out in the late 90s and a Western journalist tracked him down.
He died in 2017, right?
Yes, May 2017, he died of pneumonia. He was 77. And even then, he always rejected the title of hero. He was very humble about it. He just said, I was simply doing my job. I was the right person at the right time in the right place.
It's chilling to think about the wrong person being there. But let's pause on that moment, the moment he decided not to make the call. Because I want to pivot to our second source. Let's play the what-if game. What if Petrov had been a stickler for protocol? What if he made the call, the Soviets launched, the U.S. launched back? What actually happens?
And for that, we have to move from the history books to the physics books.
Yeah.
Specifically, The Effects of Nuclear Weapons, the 1977 edition. This book it's heavy, not just physically, but emotionally. It attempts to quantify the unquantifiable.
So Petrov saw 5 missiles on his screen, but a full exchange, that would involve thousands of warheads. Let's just talk about one explosion. The manual breaks down the energy of a nuclear blast. Unpack that for us.
Right. So when a nuclear weapon detonates in the air, the immense energy it releases is split into roughly 3 categories. About 50% is the blast and shockwave. About 35% is thermal radiation. That's pure light and heat. And the remaining 15% is nuclear radiation, both immediate and long-term.
Let's start with the heat, the thermal radiation. Because I think that's the part people really underestimate. We think of the boom, the blast, but the manual describes something else happening first.
Yes. The speed of light is faster than the speed of sound. So the first thing you experience isn't the explosion you hear, it's the light you see and feel. The manual describes the creation of the fireball.
Which is what, exactly?
It's a sphere of superheated air, plasma really, heated to temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun. For a 1 megaton weapon, which was a standard size for a strategic warhead in the 80s, the fireball itself can grow to nearly 5,700 feet across.
That's over a mile wide ball of sun appearing on the surface of the Earth.
And it is brighter than the sun. The thermal radiation, the light and heat, moves out from it at the speed of light. The manual has these chillingly precise charts, and it states that on a clear day, a 1 megaton explosion can cause third-degree, moderately severe skin burns at a distance of 12 miles.
12 miles away. So you could be in the suburbs, looking out your window at the city skyline, and before you even hear a noise, your skin is literally cooking.
Flash burns. They happen instantly. The manual is very specific about this. It differentiates between flame burns, like being in a house fire, and flash burns, which are caused by the direct absorption of that intense radiant energy. It burns clothes, it melts paint, and if you were looking at it, it permanently burns the retinas. It causes blindness, miles and miles away.
And then comes the blast.
Then comes the shock wave.
Yeah.
A few seconds later, depending on your distance, this is about 50% of the energy. It's a literal wall of compressed air moving faster than the speed of sound.
Like a sonic boom, but worse.
Infinitely worse.
Yeah.
The manual describes two phases. First, you have the overpressure.
Yeah.
It's a sudden, immense squeeze. It can be hundreds of pounds per square inch. It crushes concrete buildings. It crushes your lungs. Then, immediately following that, you get the dynamic pressure, the wind.
Like a hurricane.
A hurricane on another planet. We're talking winds of hundreds, maybe over 1,000 miles per hour, close to ground zero. The manual uses this term drag loading. It's not just the wind pushing on a building, it's the wind getting a purchase on it and tearing it apart, dragging the pieces along. It turns debris glass, steel, cars, people into high-velocity missiles.
And the manual mentions something called the Mach stem. What is that?
This is a terrifying quirk of physics that weapon designers figured out how to use. If you detonate the bomb in the air, an airburst, the shock wave travels down, hits the ground, and reflects upwards. This reflected wave then catches up to the original still incoming wave.
And they combine.
They merge into a single reinforced vertical wave front. That's the Mach stem. In this zone, near the ground, the pressure is nearly double what it would be from the initial wave alone. It essentially scours the ground clean. This is why airbursts are used for destroying cities. They maximize the area of total destruction.
And all of this, the heat, the blast, we haven't even talked about the radiation yet, the invisible part.
The invisible killer. The manual divides this into initial and residual. Initial radiation is the flood of gamma rays and neutrons that come out in the first minute of the explosion. They're invisible, they penetrate walls, they go right through you, they destroy your body's ability to make blood cells. You might survive the blast and the heat, but if you're close enough to get a high dose, you die a few agonizing weeks later from acute radiation sickness.
And residual radiation, that's the fallout.
That's the fallout, and this is where the clean versus dirty bomb distinction comes in. A pure fusion bomb, a hydrogen bomb, is theoretically cleaner because the fusion process itself doesn't create a lot of long-lasting radioactive fission products.
Yeah.
But, and the manual is very clear on this, most H-bombs aren't pure fusion. They're three-stage weapons.
Fission, fusion, fission.
Exactly. They use a small fission bomb as a trigger to start the fusion reaction. Then, they wrap the whole fusion core in a jacket made of cheap, non-fissile uranium-238.
Why do that?
To massively boost the power. The high-energy neutrons from the fusion reaction are powerful enough to split the uranium in the jacket. It can double the total explosive yield for very little extra cost, but it creates a massive amount of dirt, horrifically radioactive fission products.
And that's what becomes fallout.
That's what becomes fallout. If that fireball touches the ground in what's called a surface burst, it sucks up thousands of tons of dirt and debris, vaporizes it, mixes it with this radioactive stew, and then carries it up into the mushroom cloud. It then falls back to Earth, sometimes hundreds of miles downwind, as black rain. That's what makes land uninhabitable for decades or even centuries.
So when Stanislav Petrov saw those 5 dots on the screen, he wasn't just seeing abstract blips. He was seeing this.
Yeah.
He was seeing mile-wide fireballs, flash burns at 12 miles, skin melting, cities being scoured off the face of the earth.
He was seeing the end of civilization as we know it. That is the physical reality. That is the weight of the red button.
Okay, that was 1983. That was the loud fear, the sudden screaming terror of missiles flying. But now I want to fast forward. We are in 2026. The Cold War over, but the threat hasn't gone away. It's just changed. It's become quieter. It's moved from the sky to the underground bunker.
And this brings us to Iran. And to our third source, the report from ISIS, the Institute for Science and International Security, dated June 9, 2025. This is based on the latest available international monitoring data.
Let's set the scene for January 2026 based on this report. We aren't talking about a sudden siren anymore. We are talking about a creep. A slow, methodical accumulation of capability that happens almost in plain sight.
Exactly. The headline from the mid-2025 data is stark, and it's almost hard to comprehend. Iran has effectively mastered the nuclear fuel cycle. The breakout time, which is the time it takes to produce enough weapons-grade uranium for a single bomb, is no longer measured in years or even months. It is now measured in days.
Wait.
Days. The report states that at the Fordo facility alone, which you have to remember is buried deep inside a mountain to protect it from airstrikes, they could produce the first 25 kilograms of weapons-grade uranium in 2 to 3 days.
2 to 3 days. Let's sit with that. That's a long weekend. By the time Western intelligence might confirm a breakout has started, and by the time the diplomats even schedule a meeting to talk about it, Iran could already have the material for a bomb.
Yes. The window for a non-military response has effectively closed, and it gets worse. Within 1 month, using their facilities at Fordo and Natanz combined, the report estimates they could have enough material for 11 nuclear weapons. By the 5th month, 22 weapons.
How did it get this fast? I remember for years hearing about their 60% enrichment. They always claimed it was for civilian purposes, for medical isotopes or something.
And that is the 60% trap. It was a brilliant and deeply cynical strategy. And it's crucial to understand the math here, the physics of enrichment. Enrichment isn't linear. The amount of effort it takes, what physicists call separative work units, or SWU, is heavily front-loaded.
What do you mean by that?
Well, think of it like climbing a mountain that's incredibly steep at the bottom and almost flat at the top. Getting from natural uranium ore, which is 0.7% useful U-235, to even 20% enrichment is the vast majority of the work. That's the hard part.
Okay.
In terms of the total effort required, getting from natural uranium all the way to 60% enriched is 99% of the work.
Wait, unpack that. 60% sounds like it's only 2/3 of the way to 90%, which is weapons grade.
It sounds that way, but the physics is counterintuitive. Once you have a stockpile of 60% enriched material, going from 60% to 90% weapons grade is practically a rounding error in terms of effort and time. It's a very short, very quick sprint to the finish line.
So by stockpiling hundreds of kilograms of 60% uranium, they are essentially standing on the threshold.
Exactly. They are standing at the door, key in the lock, ready to turn it. And the ISIS report highlights something very telling. They have been depleting their stockpile of 20% enriched uranium to make this 60% stock.
Why is that significant?
Because 20% enriched uranium does have some legitimate civilian research uses for research reactors, 60%. The expert analysis in the report is blunt and unambiguous. Iran has no civilian use or justification for its production of 60% enriched uranium. None. It is exclusively a stepping stone to the bomb.
So the intent is built into the physics. If you are making this stuff, you have a military goal.
Precisely. And the infrastructure they've built matches that intent. The report details the massive expansion at Natanz. In 2024 and 2025, they installed thousands of new advanced centrifuges, IR6s, IR4s, IR2 mirrors. These aren't the clunky old IR1 machines from the early 2000s. These are Ferraris compared to Model Ts. The total installed enrichment capacity is now roughly 64,000 SW per year. That's a massive industrial capability.
But here's the part of the report that really scared me. It's not just what we know they have, it's what we don't know. The report uses the word blindness.
This is the critical failure point for the international community. Over the last few years, leading up to this 2025 report, Iran has systematically and deliberately dismantled the verification regime of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA.
How?
Step by step. They removed the IAEA cameras from key workshops and enrichment halls. They shut off the electronic, real-time monitoring systems. And in a move of pure political aggression, they de-designated the most experienced, most effective inspectors.
De-designate. That sounds like a polite HR term for kick them out.
It is. They basically told the IAEA, we don't like these specific inspectors from Western countries because they are too good at their jobs and find things we don't want them to find, so they are no longer welcome here. The IAEA Director General called it an inappropriate political act. But the result is what matters. The IAEA has officially lost continuity of knowledge.
Continuity of knowledge. That sounds like an innocent bureaucratic phrase, but it's devastating, isn't it? It means we don't know where all the parts are.
Correct. It means we know, more or less, how many centrifuges are installed and spinning at the declared sites like Natanz and Fordo. We have no idea how many rotors and bellows, the key precision-engineered components, were manufactured in their workshops in 2024 and 2025. We don't know if they were stored in a warehouse or moved to a secret, undeclared location.
So hypothetically, they could have built an entire parallel program, a secret plant.
That is the nightmare scenario. The report explicitly states, and I'm quoting here, "A risk is that Iran will accumulate a secret stock of advanced centrifuges deployable in the future at a clandestine enrichment plant." Because these new IR-6 centrifuges are so small and so efficient, you don't need a massive, easily spotted hull like at Natanz anymore. You could hide a breakout cascade in a large basement or an anonymous industrial warehouse, and it could crank out weapons-grade material while the world is busy watching the declared sites.
So this brings us to the synthesis of our three sources. We have the 1983 flash of the siren and the 2026 creep of the centrifuge.
It's a perfect study in contrasts. Stanislav Petrov had minutes to make a decision about a false positive from a loud, screaming machine. The world now has maybe days, at best weeks, to react to a potential true positive. But we might not even see it happening because the warning system has been turned off.
Because the eyes and ears, the IAEA inspectors and cameras are gone.
Exactly. In 1983, the satellite malfunctioned, but at least there was a satellite sending a signal. In 2026, we have willfully allowed the monitoring system to degrade to the point of being functionally useless for preventing a rapid breakout. If Iran decides to make the dash for the bomb, they would almost certainly do it between the quarterly inspection windows or at a secret site we don't even know exists.
The report mentions a 3-week scenario. Can you walk us through that? How does the breakout happen physically?
Yeah, it gets into the technical weeds a bit, but it's really important because it shows the mindset. It's all about something called tails assay. Normally, when you enrich uranium in a civilian program, you want to be efficient. You want to squeeze every last atom of useful U-235 out of the feedstock. But that takes time. It's slow and steady.
Right. You're trying to save money, be efficient.
But if you want to move fast, if you are in a military rush to build a bomb before the Americans or Israelis can bomb your facility, you don't care about efficiency. You care about speed. So you use a wasteful process. You configure your centrifuges to run with a high tails assay. You feed the 60% enriched gas in, you quickly extract the 90% product you want, and you dump the waste or tails, even while it still have a lot of good, highly enriched stuff in it, maybe still at 20% or 30%.
You're throwing away gold to get to the diamonds faster.
That's a perfect analogy. By doing this high tails assay, they can cut the time to get that first bomb's worth of material drastically.
Right.
The report estimates that using this method at Fordo, they get that first 25 kilograms of 90% uranium in just a few days. And then, because they have so much industrial capacity, they can just take that waste from the first run and refeed it into another cascade later to get even more. It's a sprint, not a marathon.
But having the uranium isn't the same as having the bomb, right? You still have to build the actual device. People say that's the hard part.
That's true. That's the weaponization timeline. The enriched uranium is the fuel. The weapon itself is the engine. But the report notes another deeply worrying development. Iran has resumed uranium metal production.
Why is that specific step so important?
Because you don't use uranium hexafluoride gas in a bomb. You use two solid, perfectly machined hemispheres of uranium metal, the core or the pit. Producing uranium metal has almost no civilian application for Iran's program, but it is an absolutely essential, non-negotiable step for building the core of a nuclear weapon.
So they are practicing the final steps.
They are. The consensus estimate is that they could test a crude nuclear explosive underground, like a big truck-sized device, just to prove it works, roughly 6 months after the decision to break out.
And what about putting it on a missile? A deliverable warhead?
To shrink it down, to miniaturize it, to fit on the tip of one of their Shahab or Sigil ballistic missiles. That takes more sophisticated engineering and testing. The estimate is roughly 2 years. But you have to remember, once they test that first device underground, the entire geopolitical game changes instantly. They become a threshold nuclear state. They have deterrence. The world has to treat them differently from that day forward.
There's one more detail in the report that felt like a deliberate loose thread in a mystery novel, the mention of Esfahan.
Ah, yes, the Esfahan uranium conversion facility. The report notes that over the past year, large amounts of both 20% and 60% enriched uranium were moved from the enrichment sites at Natanz and Fordo to Esfahan, officially for storage.
What's the problem with that?
The problem is that the IAEA reports suddenly stopped tracking the exact amounts of material there with the same level of detail. It's become a black hole in the data. There is a significant quantity of highly enriched material sitting in storage, largely unmonitored, potentially ready to be diverted. If you were going to sneak material out to a secret clandestine enrichment site, you wouldn't take it from the active centrifuge line, where inspectors might notice a pressure drop or a change in output.
You'd take it from the storage shed out back where no one is looking too closely.
It is the classic shell game. played with the most dangerous substance on Earth.
So let's bring this all together. We've looked at the terror of the blast, the skin-melting, city-crushing reality of 1977 physics. We've looked at the ease of the error, how a single man in 1983 had to disobey a machine to save the world. And we've looked at the terrifying capability for the future, how in 2025 and 2026, the machine is being built silently in the dark.
The connection, for me, the through line, is the collapse of the buffer zone. In 1983, we had a buffer. It was dangerously thin. It was one man's skepticism and gut instinct, but it held. We relied on a human being to look at the data and say, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right.
And today, in 2026...
Today, the technical buffer is gone. The breakout timeline for Iran to get the bomb is now shorter than the diplomatic timeline to try and stop them. We are relying on inspectors who aren't allowed in the room. We are relying on cameras that have been turned off. We are relying on the good faith of a regime that has shown nothing but bad faith for 2 decades.
It feels like we are sleepwalking into this crisis. In 1983, everyone was awake, everyone was terrified. The fear, in a strange way, kept us sharp. It kept us from making stupid mistakes. Today, the centrifuge spins silently, this report gets filed as a PDF on a server somewhere, and life goes on.
And that is the danger of the quiet apocalypse. The so what here is that the barrier to entry for the end of the world has been dramatically lowered. It used to require a superpower's GDP and the scientific might of thousands of people. Now it requires a fortified mountain facility, a few thousand advanced machines, and few days of darkness.
I want to leave our listeners with a final thought, bringing it back to where we started. We started with Stanislav Petrov. He is the unlikely protagonist of this story. He saved the world because he realized that 5 missiles just didn't make sense. It was, in his words, illogical.
Right. It didn't fit the pattern of a real attack.
But here is the provocative thought for us, sitting here in 2026. Today, if the alarm finally goes off, it won't be a strange, illogical glitch in the sunlight. It won't be 5 missiles. It will be the final, logical outcome of a calculated, silent accumulation of material and capability that we watched happen, step by step, report by report, until the final piece clicked into place.
In 1983, the silence of the radar screen saved us. In 2026, the silence from the inspectors and the cameras might be what condemns us.
So the question is this. If Iran creates a nuclear weapon in the dark, effectively and irrevocably breaking the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and no sensor triggers to warn us in time, is the silence more dangerous than the siren?
That is the question we need to be asking ourselves right now.
Sleep well, learners.